All right, we are going to go over Chapter 25. It looks to me like the number of places for the job fair is going down, not up, which is never a good sign. But right now, it looks like there's about 35 companies that are going to be there. The only two that I saw, or three that were IT specific, were Tech Systems, Charter. There was one other one. Okay. Well, that's the thing, is we never know. Okay. And that's one of the things that Evan's been charged with, is trying to kind of clean that up for all of the place, for all the campuses. Are you working Saturday at the open house, Brady?
This coming Saturday?
Yeah. It's interesting, I just was talking to Mr. Corrigan before I came in here, and there was an open house at Perryville on Saturday of last week. And evidently Mike Stussy, who's the instructor there, couldn't make it, so Charles went down. And I said, how was it? He goes, well, Jeff, I sat there from 8 until 12. Do you want to guess how many people came? And I said, 4. And he goes, nope. And Paul Knott goes, 2. And he goes, nope. And I said, 1. And he goes, nope. And Paul goes, nobody. And he goes, yep. Evidently, they did not publicize the Perryville one at all. I don't know. Somebody made the decision to not to publicize it, I guess. I don't know. But hopefully this one will be a little better attended. But it's, I think, 10 to 2. Now, the job fair, just so you know, too, right now it's only scheduled for an hour. 9:30 to 10:30 on Friday. My guess is you can get there already, like around 9:15 if you want to. All right. With only 35, I don't know if they're all going to be in the big hall. That'd be my guess, and people will like those people will register in the smaller hall, but I don't know for sure. The other thing I want to tell you, and again, you may not care, but I'm just telling you to try to be complete. If you have a desire to learn more about Model View Controller when we get done, on my YouTube channel, and they're not the greatest videos, but what I've done is, if you go to the end of the YouTube channel, I've gone through a bunch of the things that Microsoft has, and I've kind of rebuilt them very slowly, bit by bit. So, I mean, what I'm saying is, if you go down to here, this has just got the first 100 videos, and there's almost 200 on here. So, if I go down here and I click Edit, and I go down to the bottom, come on, let me go down to the bottom. What you'll notice is down toward the bottom here, whoop, not home, I want end. Notice MVC bonus lectures. There's about 15 of them. All right, so if you have an interest. Again, if you don't, you're not hurting my feelings any. So. All right, so Chapter 25, the last chapter in the book, starts on page 865. The first thing to realize is Model View Controller is not something new. It's been around for a long time. In fact, many people would say that it's been around since one of the first programming languages, Simula 65. So really that would make it over 50 years old. All right, but it's really become a lot more in vogue lately for languages, languages that are web-centric, such as ASP.NET. All right. The author mentions in here that you really shouldn't look at what we've been doing so far, web forms and Model View Controller, as being like opponents. Sometimes it's better to use one, sometimes it's better to use the other. All right. I think I've got to turn off my. All right. So as you can see, the way the chapter is split up: an introduction to MVC, all right, an introduction to ASP.NET MVC. So the first part is more generic in nature, just talking about what MVC is. The second part is specific to ASP.NET. Then they go with working with views and working with controls and postback. All right. So taking it from the top then. I've already mentioned a lot of this, but if you look, what they're saying is you're sitting there at your browser. you key something in. You key in some kind of URL. You hit enter. That HTTP request goes to a controller. All right? And you'll notice that that controller can go back and forth between the models, so the communication goes in both directions. The model are those classes. We started talking about classes a little bit in the last chapter, but that's what the model is involved. Those classes that are in the model, they're going to communicate directly with the data store, which is normally a database. All right? So the idea is the flow goes browser to controller to model to data store to model to controller to view and back to the user. Now hopefully that makes sense and I didn't say that too fast. All right. If you remember back, a good year ago when we were talking in the AWD1111 class, and we talked about HTML and we talked about CSS and we talked about JavaScript, and then we got into where we were to the point where we split them up, and your HTML were in your .html files, and you linked to your CSS that were in their CSS files, and you linked using a script tag to your JavaScript files. Well, it's the same kind of thing here. The idea is by breaking this thing into parts, it makes it easier, all right, to work with. That's the idea. Now, the bad thing is there's no firm and fast rules. What you're never supposed to do, this is supposed to be all the code that would reference the database and does your business rules. That's what's supposed to be in here. All right? You're never supposed to have code that addresses your business rules or the database in here. Never. All right? And this should only be routing stuff back and forth. That's all it should be doing. But if you decide, well, I'm going to take, even though I shouldn't do it, I'm going to take some model stuff and put it in my view, there's nothing stopping you from doing it. You're going against the model or the whole idea, but you can do it. All right? There's nothing in the software that prohibits you from doing it. So as it says, the model consists of the files that contain the data access code. All right? Those are typically going to be your classes that are going to be mapped to the database. All right? Your business logic code, we talked about those business rules, and your data validation control, or code rather. The view, as it says, it consists of the files that create the HTML for the user interface and return some kind of response, all right, to the user. Finally, the controller gets the request, all right, routes it to the appropriate part of the model, takes the information that's returned from the model and routes it to the appropriate view. All right, in a nutshell, that's what it is. So here's the benefits. I don't want to read these to you. The idea is it makes life easier for you. That's what it's at least supposed to be doing. All right? All right. So the kind of tough thing about this is if you look right here, they go back and they redo the shopping cart thing as an MVC application. And when I say it's kind of tough, it's because it looks real similar to what we've been seeing throughout the book. All right, so the whole code that's behind it is different, but that said, the output is pretty much the same. All right, so the idea is, okay, I get that, then why should I use it? All right, because you end up having a lot more things done for you automatically. I have never worked at a company or worked with a professional in this industry that said, I'd rather do it the harder way. All right, I realize it's going to be more code and it's going to be harder and I'm going to have to do more work, but I'd rather do that. All right, but because typically if you tell somebody, hey, I've got this way, it'll automate things for you. Right? I don't know if you've seen that commercial that's out on TV now. There's like a little girl and she's looks like she's got a really good mind and like she programs, her mom yells to her to take out the garbage and she programs where it takes it out from her room. She puts it on like a pulley and she does all this stuff, and then she's at school and they say turn to page 200 and she's got a mechanical hand that turns the page for her. All right, well, the reason I'm telling you that is at the end she's talking to a guy, I don't know if it's her boss or what, but she said, oh, I programmed the robots to do the inspection for us. They do it faster and they do a lot better job. All right. Well, again, life is easier. You might have to do a little bit more work at the beginning, but then a lot more of it will be automated for you, and ideally it'll be done in a better way. All right, and that's what you're supposed to be getting out of this. Now, when you look in here, notice the words. It says we're going to have the pages in the card application and the concepts they illustrate. The home page will be a simple controller and a simple view. Well, we know we've heard the words model, view, controller, and you see right there is a controller and there is a view. Not a trick question. What step is missing? If you got a controller and you got a view, what's not there? The model. Why? Because it's a home page. The idea is it's supposed to allow people to go from page to page, and it might have a little, like a welcome or whatever, but there's no real logic to it, typically on a home page. Not always, but typically. Contact us, a controller that uses a view model and a strongly typed view. We'll get into that in just a little bit. Order, controls in a view, controllers that handle both get and post requests. We have talked about this before. Typically, if you're trying to change something, you're going to be doing posts. If you're just trying to relay information and not change it, you're going to be doing gets. All right, and then card models and view models to work, and how to work with model view binding. So, this is the procedure that the author gives for creating an MVC application. You create your application. What you're going to see on the next page is you create it differently than the way we've been creating applications so far. All right? Then you create the model, then you create the controller, then you create the view. Now, what most people like to do is almost invert that order. People like to do the view first because it's the sexy part. It's the part that shows the output. All right? And you want to show that to the user or whomever's going to look at it. Hey, look, this is what I did. No, it should be done last. You should have a really good understanding, because the reason you do the model first is that's where all your logic goes. And then you do the controller, because that's going to wire up the logic to your final view. All right? So that was, in a nutshell, that was regular MVC, the kind of MVC that anything will use. Now they start to get into, as they call it, an introduction to ASP.NET MVC. All right, so let's just do this. So I come in here, I'll start up Visual Studio. In the past, what we've always done is we've done File, then we went to New, then we went to Project, don't know what that's doing. But we do a File, New, Project, all right? Just like we see right here, but if it would ever come back, I don't know why it's not. There we go. All right? And we've always done this, right? Okay, we gave it a name, etc. We still want to do the File, New Project. We still want to do the ASP.NET, so I'm just going to say this, MVC Demo, all right? And then we click OK. What we've always done in here is either we have chosen empty or we've chosen web forms. By and large, we've chosen web forms. Now, one thing to realize, notice we've got a bunch of different possibilities. With any of these, regardless of which one you chose, so let's say I even chose simple page application, all right? You can still choose MVC and Web API. I can have an MVC, that's what we're going to choose, but I can still use web forms if I want to. these two things can work with one another. It's not so much that they work against each other. It's not like, well, I've got this web form project, so I can't have MVC, or vice versa. No. But for what we'll do, all right, we will keep this in MVC. And notice here, if we want to host it in the cloud, we're not going to do that now, but we'll take a look at that later. Okay? All right. What's recommended, you don't have to do this, but I'm just telling you what's recommended is that you also check this where it says add unit tests. It'll build, if you do that, what it does is it builds a folder, a unit test folder for you, and it'll help automate the process of doing it. If you don't do it, you can even add it later, but it's just recommended that you do that from the beginning. So, the other thing that's in here, if you look on the screen, please, is notice it says change authentication. And when I hover over it, it turns blue. Well, here's the types of authentication that we can have. The first one that we create in here, it's going to be so simple, we're going to choose no authentication. There'll be none. All right. Notice by default, you get individual user accounts. All right. As it says, for applications that store profiles in an SQL server database. That's what's recommended. All right. And what's kind of cool is look at this. You can register or sign in using Facebook or Twitter or Google or Microsoft or some other provider. It's got built-in hooks for a lot of that stuff. All right. We could choose work and school accounts. All right. And finally, there's the regular Windows authentication. But for right now, I'm not doing anything with this, so I'm not going to change anything, but I just want to show you that we've got those. All right. So I'm going to click OK. It's going to spin a little bit again, but notice when this comes up over here in our Solution Explorer, we're going to have a bunch of folders that we've never seen before. Yeah, I'm not, it doesn't matter for what we're doing. Why mine is so, it's probably because I've got a million things open, so. All right, so there it is. What? You don't have the option to click MVC? Yeah, you do. Now choose that. Choose ASP.NET Web Application and go to your next. Then you should have it on your next window. There. All right. Now, a few things as we take a look at this. Some of the stuff that we are going to look at. Well, you know what app data is already. Okay? That's where we put our databases. Now, notice what's in here. There's a thing called app start. Everybody see that? And there's these files that are in here. This stuff is all created for us. Okay? One thing that you get in here is you get a file called bundle config. What bundle config does is it gives you another place where you can basically, it sort of takes the place of like a master page where you can include, so I've got bundles here, jQuery, this can be all my jQuery stuff. I can put all my Bootstrap stuff in here, etc. You're going to see that as we go on. All right? You can put your own stuff in here. If you're not using something that's in here, you can remove it, etc. I don't think we're going to even look at the filter config. There's not much in there, as you can see. We're not going to look at the identity config. I don't believe there's anything in there we're going to touch. The route config is kind of neat. Doesn't look like much. But when you are working with Model View Controller, the idea is you have to be able to understand routes. And what I mean by that is you're used to seeing something where if you've ever looked at a URL, let's say that you're out on Amazon. All right, and you've got some kind of a product and you're throwing it into a shopping cart. You're going to be under HTTPS or whatever, // www.amazon.com, maybe a few more things. then you might have a question mark and you might have a whole boatload of stuff. All right? You're not going to have any of that stuff now. All right? What we're going to have is something that's going to look more like this. And what this is going to say is, okay, right now I only have a home controller. Okay, when I bring up that home controller, the file I want to come up by default is index.html. Does that make sense? That's the file by default. And right now, I can have parameters if I want parameters. But they're optional. Again, I don't expect that to make a whole lot of sense to you. But as we start adding more controllers, this stuff is going to get more complex. All right? Now, we actually have, okay, when you look in here, you're like, okay, all right, I'm looking, there's a global ASAX. Is that my start file? The answer is no. All right. So when I go to run this, this isn't going to look that different from what we've been doing before. All right. After tomorrow, if we can get done everything I'm hoping we can get done, you're going to have a full-fledged application. It's going to have 4 or 5 pages on it. All right. This isn't any different. Still picking a random port, and it's going to come through here. We're going to create tomorrow a very simple to-do list. All right. It's just going to be real simple. When you bring it up, I just want to show this to you, if it ever comes up. Because anybody can build this. I mean, this took no work. This took choosing a bunch of options. All right? And you'll notice we've got application name, home, so it's right where we are, about, not much in there. Contact, not much in there. What we're going to do tomorrow is we're going to start with this, then we're going to add a page here that's going to be called priorities. All right? And we're going to basically set up a database but not put any records in it. And we're going to have, what we have for a priority, like a priority ID, all right, then a priority name, or a priority, low, medium, high. 1 will be low, 2 will be medium, 3 will be high, maybe we'll have a 4 and that'll be urgent. That makes sense? So that'll be a page you'll see here. Then next to this we'll have another page that will say tasks or to-dos or whatever. And we'll be able, when we choose these, we'll be able to add information into either one of those tables that'll go right into the database for us. All right? Plus what you'll notice is we'll have the tables linked so that when we bring up the tasks, we'll automatically have a drop-down list for us that'll list low, medium, high, and urgent. It'll select the priorities. All right, so all we have to do is choose the one that we want. So we'll do that. All right, and yeah, that'd be enough. But I'm looking at this, and I'm like, you know what? Pardon my French, that page just sucks. Every page looks like that. So when we get done, we're going to change that page and actually make it look like a regular home page for a to-do list. Okay, we'll get rid of this and we'll put some better stuff in here. We'll put some better stuff in here. Then we'll go to about, and I mean, everybody knows what a to-do list is, all right, but we'll put some code in there anyway so it'll look a little bit more professional. It'll be basically just some text in there. And then we'll come into here. You all know how to make a contact form. You've all made a contact form. So we'll actually have a contact form, all right? So the idea behind this is we're going to create the project. It's going to look basically like this, all right? And when we get done with this, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to basically take this, everything we're working on here, and we're going to save it. We're going to do a git init, and then we're going to do a git add, and we're going to add our project. Do what's called stage our project, and then we'll commit our project. All right? Then we'll go in and we'll start building each page. As we build each page, all right, we will update our git. So we'll update our versioning. So we'll have a beginning page, then we will add priorities, then we will add tasks, then we will update the home page, then we will update the about page, then we will update the contact page. So we'll have 6 versions of this, all right? And the idea behind showing you this is to show you software versioning and the fact that you can always back up. So if you said, you know, I added this thing back in step 4 out of 6, I really wish I wouldn't have. Well, you can bring it back up to step 4 then and start working on it from there. That's one thing. The other thing is when you use versioning like this, you know, especially, and I'm gonna use these guys as an example, but with the work that that Evan and Brady are doing. Let's say they had a common place where they put all their code. All right, that would be their common code repository. Now it's the weekend, and they decided over the weekend there's 2 more things that have to be done, and Brady's going to be doing one of those things, and Evan's going to do the other thing. All right. Well, what is out there, what they're working on is what's referred to as their master branch. All right. But what they can do is they can create branches off that master branch and do any kind of work they want to do with them, and then merge that back in again. All right. And that's what we're going to look at. Now, what I've told you so far is all Git. Then GitHub comes in, because what GitHub is it's more or less, I'm being general here, it's a free server that you can use to push all your code out to. All right? When you set up GitHub accounts, and we're going to do that, but when you set up GitHub accounts, you can have either a private account or a public account. They both have their pluses and minuses. The biggest plus of a public account is anybody else can see it. The biggest minus of a public account is anybody else can see it. All right? But the other big advantage of a public account is they're free. The private account, the advantage is only you have access. The disadvantage is they're not free. I don't know what the cost is. But you may or may not have ever seen this before. But a lot of times, it used to be when I would get stuff from a publisher for a book, all right, they would send me a CD or they'd send me a link to something or whatever. Now, a lot of times what people do is they put stuff out on GitHub. And if somebody puts something out onto a GitHub account, you're like, that looks really cool. You can do what's called clone it, where you're copying everything that they've done. And we're going to take a look at all of that stuff. All right? Okay. So the folders that are in here, we already started to talk about these. I mentioned app data, I mentioned app start, but you see there's a controllers folder, there's a models folder, there's a views folder. And as you'd probably guess, you can right mouse click on any of those folders and add a new controller, or add a new model, or add a new view. That makes sense? Kind of the same way we've been doing it really all semester, but it's just different folder names. So as it says, controllers are in the controllers folder, models and view models are in the models folder, and views are in the views folder. All right? We're still going to have the content folder that's going to have our style sheet. The author there recommends that you use that content folder to hold your images. Everybody see what's on the screen right there? So their recommendation is you don't have a separate images folder. I haven't read the rationale for wanting to do that. I don't see where we have to do that. So we're just going to build our own images folder. All right? Scripts for our JavaScript files. And then notice, because I showed you this before, this global.asax file. The application level event handlers. By default, it has application_start. Why does that matter? Well, if you had something special you wanted to have happen, such as maybe adding a splash screen, all right, you could call that in your application start. Okay? All right. Startup.cs. It's a class file that calls the configuration code. I actually showed you that one. You may or may not have noticed it. And there's some config files. The configuration files for NuGet and the application. You may or may not have noticed this if you'd all look up on the screen here for a sec. All right? from what I chose before, notice if I go over into scripts, it's got jQuery and a boatload of other stuff. I didn't have to NuGet that, did I? No. All right. If I go over here into content, it's got my bootstrap.css, my bootstrap.min.css, and it creates its own site file. Not a lot in there, but a little bit. This basically handles adding some padding at the top and bottom for Bootstrap. All right. In fact, a lot of it is just in there for Bootstrap stuff. Okay. But the point is, we got this stuff added without us having to go out to the NuGet packet manager. All right. Because the idea is when you create a model view controller application, you're going to need jQuery at one time or another. You're going to need Bootstrap at one time or another. So we're just going to bring them in for you. So that's what it does. All right. The next thing. Anybody want to take a guess here? .CSHTML. Anybody want to take a guess at what that stands for? That's exactly what it is. All right. This is almost, I don't know if I've given you this analogy before. And maybe I've told you this how this happened to me. Years ago, I'm throwing out a tie. My wife goes, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm throwing out this tie." She goes, "Is it ripped?" And I said, "No." She goes, "Why are you throwing it out?" I said, "It's a thin tie. They're not in anymore." She said, "Just save it. They'll eventually come back in. Then you'll be wanting to throw out your wide ties." Well, the reason I'm telling you that is what happens here with these kind of files is you're able to use what's called the razor. All right, and with razor, you're able to kind of intermix and write C# and HTML code together. So what does that have to do with ties? Well, the idea is there's a coming together rather than in the past they've talked about splitting apart. You can't have your C# and your HTML together. You just can't do that. They have to be separate. That's not what this says. All right? Now, when you write this stuff, you end up putting your code and it'll look like this. See the @ sign? That basically is telling you that what's following, okay, is C# inside of your HTML files. And it's okay to do that. And the good news is it's not the same syntax, but you've seen that before. You've seen how you can put script tags in your HTML files to add JavaScript. All right. You've seen how you could put style tags in your HTML files to add CSS. Kind of the same thing in here. All right. So they mentioned the Razor view engine and the default routing are available when you create the application. There's nothing extra you have to do. Razor also provides for IntelliSense support for you. All right. How to create a model? Not hard. All right. Typically, when you create a model, you right mouse click, on your models folder, add. Okay. So again, I've shown you this a little, or I talked about this before, but when you look on the screen here, all right, and we close a few things we don't need. If I right mouse click on the controllers folder, add, the first thing that comes up is what? Controller, right? That's the easiest way to add a brand new controller. If I right mouse click on models and I click add, the first thing that comes up, well, I've got controller there, but normally if you look on the screen, when you're in your models folder and you click add, you're almost always going to go to class. All right? And then finally, when I go to views and I right mouse click and I add, notice view. They're not hard to add is what I'm saying. All right? And we are going to actually do a couple examples of these. And when we first do a couple of examples, they're going to be like, why are we doing this? This is just so simple. Because I just want you to change a couple things just to see what happens when you do it. That's all. So the model is the code that deals with the data. The models are typically class files. All right. Next, they come in and they talk about, so here's the models folder. So when you look in there, all right, those are the CS files. How to do it, right mouse click, I already showed you that. How to create a controller, again, notice the controller contains the code that handles the HTTP request, and as I mentioned to you before, it acts like a traffic cop. It makes sure, because the model and the view cannot communicate directly with one another. It is the go-between, the intermediary, the supervisor, whatever you want to call it, between those two. You'll start seeing this. And it gets confusing. Okay, I want to create a controller. What kind do I want to create? Oftentimes when you do it, it doesn't matter. Sometimes you want it to be empty. Why empty? Because then it's an empty controller. You can put anything in there you want to put in. On the other hand, if I know I'm going to use it with the entity framework, I might want to choose model controller with views using entity framework. So it depends on what it is you're doing as far as which one of these that you will choose. Notice too, this may sound real simple, but controllers follow a naming convention. So if I'm going to create a controller that's called, I don't know, product, all right, then it should be named product controller. You should always have the word controller at the end. When the system is looking to map things up, that's how it does it. It's looking for these things to be named in a certain way. Controllers, as it says here on the bottom of page 879, they contain what are called action methods. What we'll eventually do is we'll return a view. That's what it'll do. All right, and if you don't know what that means, you'll understand. Some of this stuff is a little bit, for lack of better words, it's weird if you've never seen it before. All right, so next they talk about working with views. All right, and a view is a combination of HTML and Razor code that's going to provide the user interface for you. Okay, in a nutshell, that's what it's doing. Every action method in a controller that calls the view method needs to have a corresponding view. And again, you're going to see this when we get into it. Also, as they mentioned on the bottom of the page here, when you create views, you can create a regular view or what's called a strongly typed view. Strongly typed views let you take advantage of IntelliSense. All right? So they're a little more powerful, for lack of better words. Some of this stuff, it's a little hard when you first start working on it. What do I do here? Well, you put your own stuff in here, but as it shows right here, some of this, we're going to be using drop-downs. And I will tell you, not to be funny, but if you follow along, if I say, choose this, and you choose it, you'll be fine. But if you go, I wonder what would happen if I choose this. It won't work. That's what will happen. All right? I mean, it's not a threat. I'm just telling you the truth. Now, they talk here about how to work with layout views. All right? Notice this. This is on page 882. It says the layout view is stored in a special file that begins with an underscore. Underscore layout.cshtml. That's created by default when you create the application. This view is in the shared folder. What does that mean? Well, let's take a look. All right? In the shared folder. There we go. There's layout.cshtml right here on the screen. All right. And don't worry about those underscores, but the underlines there. But if you look up on the screen here, do you notice we've got home, we've got contact. Everybody see this right there? Well, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to do this. right, I'm going to paste it in. I'm going to put in here, this doesn't exist, but I'm going to put in here, this is what we'll be doing tomorrow. Priorities, index, we'll leave it like that. All right, so I'm going to save and I'm going to run the program. You see what we have up here? We now have priorities. Now, is that a big thing? No. But it's sort of like when we set up the master page. All right? But notice if I go over to my About page, there's priorities still. Anybody want to guess what's going to happen when I click on priorities? Right now, I just told it to go to the home page because I didn't make one. All right? But what you're going to see is that file is very powerful because I can make changes in this layout, _layout.cshtml file, and have it affect every page. All right? You're going to see that tomorrow when we start working on this. There's also one in here that's called view_start.viewstart.cshtml. The author equates that one to the master page. There's going to be render body and render section razor, which are like content placeholders. All right. So the good news is that what we're going to be doing is going to be very similar to stuff we've already done. The bad news is it has other names. So the ideas are going to be similar, but you're like, oh, that's sort of like when we did this. Yeah, sort of. All right. What you start to get when you do this, too, when you look up on the screen here, all right, everybody see this? Can you see the address bar up on the screen? It says http://localhost:53183-home-index. Everybody see that? All right. Virtually 100 times out of 100, if I leave this off, this /index, it's going to look exactly the same. Remember what we said was when you bring up, when you go to a website and you don't put any file at the end, by default, the first file it looks for is index.html. If it finds it, it shows that one. If it doesn't find that, it looks for index.html. If it doesn't find that, it looks for default.html. If it doesn't find that, it looks for default.html. If it doesn't find that, it looks for some file that you've asked for it to be there. And if it can't find that, it'll give you an error. But what I'm saying is, especially for the stuff that we're doing, because it's not going to be overly complex, a lot of the time, it won't matter whether you just put home there or you put home-index. Or if we've got something else there, if it's the index file that we want to have come up, then you don't really need to put it there. You can, it doesn't hurt anything, but you typically, in most cases at least, won't have to. On 886 and 887, they talk about these strongly typed views. And the author says, what makes a strongly typed view is it has an @model directive, which identifies the type of object in the model property. So what that is doing is it's sending a signal to the system, and it says, hey, we're using this, give me IntelliSense support. All right. Now, you're going to look at this and maybe say, wait a minute, you lied to us before. You told us we don't have to worry about postback, etc. No, you can still work with postback, all right? But here's a question. Anybody. If I create an ASP.NET control, what two properties do every ASP.NET control, what two properties must they have? an ID, and a run at equal server. All right? Guess what? Those all go away because in MVC you don't use those. In MVC you use what are called HTML helpers. All right? Which is basically using Razor to write HTML for you. All right? For lack of better words. And they give you some examples on 889. On 890 here it says, if your web app contains more than one page, you'll need to add navigation links to your pages. You'll also need to redirect it in code, such as after processing a postback. To provide navigation links, you can use traditional anchor elements. All right? Same way we've been doing them before, but now notice it's an HTML dot action link. It's one of these HTML helpers, all right, that's going to be done for us. Also, and hopefully you think this is a good thing, I do, is that this stuff is all designed to work fairly well with jQuery. So jQuery has some built-in stuff that you're going to be able to use. All right? That pretty much is it for the chapter.